Welcome, dear viewers, to a story of redemption, resilience, and the transformative power of compassion. Today, we'll journey through the incredible tale of George Ross, a man abandoned at an airport who turned his darkest hour into a mission of hope, inspiring a movement that changed countless lives. Let's begin. It was an ordinary summer day at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, bustling with travelers rushing to catch flights or greet loved ones. Among them stood George Walker, a 75-year-old man clutching a small suitcase and a bouquet of daisies, his favorite flowers, chosen specially for his daughter Emma. George was dressed in his best, a neatly pressed suit and polished shoes, a picture of anticipation and excitement. Emma had left home 5 years ago to pursue her dream job in New York City, leaving her father in their modest home in Austin, Texas. George had always been proud of his daughter, working tirelessly to ensure she had every opportunity in life. He had sold their family home to help her pay for college and supported her with unwavering love, even as he quietly shelved his dreams of travel and adventure. Today was supposed to be a happy reunion. Emma had called a week ago with surprising news. She wanted George to come live with her in New York. They would finally be together again, and George would get to know his grandson, Lucas, whom he had only seen in photos. His heart brimmed with joy at the thought of spending his remaining years surrounded by family. The flight from New York landed on time, and George eagerly scanned the crowd exiting the terminal. Finally, he spotted her Emma, now sporting a chic bob haircut and dressed in a sleek business suit, wheeling a designer suitcase behind her. Her face seemed older, more serious than he remembered, but George brushed it off as the toll of a demanding career. "Emma," he called, waving enthusiastically. She looked up, hesitated, then approached with a tight smile. "Hi, Dad," she said, leaning in for a brief hug. "Oh, Emma, it's so good to see you," George exclaimed, holding her shoulders and studying her face. "You look beautiful. Sweetheart, how was the flight? And how's Lucas?" Emma glanced at her phone, her demeanor cool and distracted. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, her tone making George's smile waver. He frowned. "Of course. Emma, what is it?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around the bustling terminal. "I can't take you to New York, Dad. Plans have changed." George blinked, not comprehending. "What do you mean, Emma?" I got a big promotion," she interrupted, her voice firm but impatient. "I'm moving to San Francisco next month. There's just no way I can bring you along right now." The word struck George like a physical blow. His mind raced to understand. "But we agreed. Emma, I sold the house. I don't have anywhere else to go." Emma sighed, avoiding his gaze. "I'll help you find a nice place. Maybe a senior living community. I'll send money every month. Dad, you'll be okay." "But I thought we were going to be together." "Lucas." "Dad, I'm sorry," Emma said abruptly, checking her watch. "I really have to go. My connecting flight leaves in an hour." George stood frozen, watching her gather her suitcase and turn away. "I'll call you when I get settled," she said over her shoulder before disappearing into the crowd. The bouquet of daisies slipped from George's trembling hands, scattering petals on the terminal floor. For a moment, he stood paralyzed, his world crumbling around him. Passers-by brushed by, some giving him curious glances, but no one stopped. Eventually, George shuffled to a nearby bench and sat down, his body heavy with despair. His suitcase sat beside him, a stark reminder of his sudden homelessness. As tears silently rolled down his weathered cheeks, George clutched the rosary in his pocket and began to pray. "Lord," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I don't know what to do. Please help me." The night fell over the airport, but George remained there, lost and alone, his prayer unanswered, at least for now. The golden light of early morning bathed the bustling halls of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport as George sat quietly on a bench, his gaze distant. It had been days since Emma had abandoned him there. The ache in his heart was sharp, but he clung to hope that somehow things would improve. His worn suitcase, now doubling as a pillow at night, sat beside him, a small reminder of the life he had left behind. George had quickly learned the rhythm of the airport, a place of constant motion, where people came and went with little regard for the shadows that lingered in corners like him. Security had already warned him more than once, and his interactions with the cleaning staff revealed a mixture of suspicion and occasional kindness. One face stood out among them, Maria, a young woman whose kind eyes and gentle smile gave him brief moments of solace in the chaos. One morning, as George washed his face in the restroom, Maria approached him. "You doing okay today, Mr. George?" she asked, her voice warm and genuine. George shook his head with a sigh. "Not really, Maria, but I'll make it through. I always have." Maria hesitated for a moment before offering a small brown paper bag. "I brought you a sandwich. I hope it helps." Tears welled in George's eyes as he accepted the gift. "Thank you. You're very kind." Maria smiled. "My abuelo used to say, kindness is the only thing we can give away and still keep." She patted his shoulder and left to finish her shift, leaving George to quietly savor his first full meal in days. That afternoon, as George sat on a bench, watching hurried passengers pass by, a commotion erupted near the security checkpoint. Raised voices filled the air as two homeless men argued loudly over a spot to rest. Their escalating tempers caught the attention of Frank Miller, the head of airport security. Frank stormed over, his face a mask of irritation. "Break it up," Frank bellowed, his voice cutting through the noise. "You two need to leave now." The tension in the air was thick, passengers stopping to gawk at the scene. George, sensing the situation could spiral out of control, felt a strange compulsion to act. He stood, smoothing his wrinkled suit, and stepped between the men and Frank. "Gentlemen," George said, his voice calm but commanding. "Please, let's not make things worse. We're all just trying to get by." The two men glared at him but didn't respond. Frank crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "Sir, this is none of your business. These men are trespassing." George turned to Frank. "I understand you're doing your job, but anger won't help. Let me talk to them." Before Frank could protest, George knelt on the cold airport floor and clasped his hands together. "Lord," he began, his voice carrying above the murmurs of the growing crowd, "please grant us the patience to find peace here. Help us remember that we're all just human, trying to do our best." The crowd fell silent as George prayed, his sincerity palpable. Passengers stopped to listen, some even bowing their heads. The two homeless men shuffled awkwardly, their anger dissipating. Frank's stern expression softened as he watched the scene unfold. When George finished, he stood slowly, addressing the two men. "Now, why don't we find a better place to talk? There's no need for this anger." The men nodded, murmuring apologies before shuffling away. George turned to Frank, who was still watching him, a mixture of confusion and reluctant admiration on his face. "I've never seen anything like that," Frank admitted. "You defused the situation without raising your voice." George smiled faintly. "Sometimes, we just need to be reminded of our common humanity." Unbeknownst to George, a passenger had recorded his prayer and posted it online. Within hours, the video gained traction, sparking a wave of comments praising the airport angel who had brought calm to chaos. Among those who saw the video was Margaret Lee, the CEO of the airport. Intrigued, she decided to investigate the matter personally. The following day, George was sitting in his usual spot when Margaret approached, accompanied by Frank. "Mr. Ross," she asked, her tone professional yet warm. George stood, startled by the woman's presence. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" Margaret smiled. "I'm Margaret Lee, the CEO of this airport. I saw the video of your prayer yesterday. It was remarkable." George felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I was just trying to help." "Well, you did more than that," Margaret said. "You showed this airport something it's been lacking: compassion." She glanced at Frank, who nodded reluctantly. Margaret continued, "I understand you're in a difficult situation, Mr. Ross, but I think you could be an asset to this airport. How would you feel about becoming our honorary chaplain?" George blinked in disbelief. "A chaplain? Me? I don't have any qualifications. Margaret chuckled. You don't need a degree to show kindness. You've already proven you have a gift for it. Frank, though still skeptical, added, it would also keep you from being kicked out. George laughed, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in weeks. Well, when you put it that way, how could I say no? Over the next few days, George began his new role as the airport's chaplain. He spoke with anxious passengers, offered comfort to those dealing with bad news, and even mediated disputes between stressed travelers. Word of his presence spread quickly, and soon people sought him out, sharing their troubles and seeking advice. Maria often stopped by to check on him, her smile a constant source of encouragement. You're making a real difference, Mr. George, she said one day, watching him console a grieving woman. I hope so, George replied, his heart full for the first time in years. Even Frank, who had once dismissed George as a nuisance, began to see him in a new light. You've changed this place, Frank admitted one evening as they watched the busy terminal. It's not just an airport anymore. It feels like a community. George smiled. That's all I ever wanted, a place where people feel they belong. 1 week into his new role, George was approached by Margaret again. Mr. Ross, your work here has caught the attention of the board. They're hesitant, but I think we can make this a permanent position. What do you say? George hesitated, his heart swelling with gratitude. Ms. Lee, thank you for giving me this chance. Margaret nodded. You earned it. Mr. Ross, keep doing what you're doing. As George settled into his role, he found himself reflecting on the strange twists of fate that had brought him here. Abandoned and broken, he had found purpose and a new family among the people of the airport. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged. Little did he know, the past he thought he had left behind was about to catch up with him. And with it, the chance for a reconciliation he never expected. Hartsfield-Jackson buzzed with its usual frenetic energy as George's work as the honorary chaplain began to take root. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities to connect. Passengers approached him with everything from lost luggage woes to broken hearts. And George offered a steadying hand, a warm smile, and words of comfort. His presence had transformed a corner of the airport into a sanctuary of compassion. But even as he embraced his new role, memories of his estranged daughter, Emma, lingered. Every time he helped a young traveler or comforted a family, he thought of her. Did she ever think of him? Did she regret leaving him behind that fateful day? These questions gnawed at the edges of his peace. One crisp morning, George was seated in the staff lounge with Maria, sharing a cup of coffee. Maria, who had become a close friend, noticed the faraway look in his eyes. Mr. George, you seem quieter than usual today. Is something on your mind? She asked gently. George sighed, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. It's Emma. I try not to dwell on it, but sometimes I can't help wondering if I'll ever see her again. Maria placed a comforting hand on his arm. If she's anything like you, she'll come around. Sometimes people need time to see what's really important. George nodded, appreciating her words, though he couldn't entirely believe them. He had resigned himself to the likelihood that Emma had moved on with her life, leaving him behind for good. Meanwhile, in New York City, Emma was grappling with her own turmoil. Her once glamorous life had begun to unravel. The high-profile job she had sacrificed everything for now felt hollow, and her personal life was a mess. Late nights at the office were her only escape from the loneliness of her cold, luxurious apartment. One evening, while scrolling aimlessly through her phone, Emma stumbled upon a video shared by a former college classmate. The caption read, "Meet the airport angel changing lives in Atlanta." Intrigued, she clicked the link, her breath caught in her throat as the video played. There, kneeling in prayer in the middle of a bustling airport, was her father. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, her chest tightening as she watched him speak with such conviction and kindness. The comments beneath the video praised his selflessness and resilience. One comment stood out. "This man has been through so much but still gives so much to others. A true inspiration." Emma's hands trembled as she closed the video. Her father, the man she had abandoned, was now a symbol of hope for strangers. Guilt overwhelmed her, and she couldn't ignore the pang of longing to make things right. A few days later, Margaret Lee called George into her office. "George, we've received an interesting request," she said, handing him a letter. "A TV network wants to do a feature on hearts in transit. They're asking for interviews with you and the staff. It's a great opportunity to showcase the program." George read the letter, his brow furrowing. "A feature? I don't know. Margaret, I'm not sure I want all that attention." Margaret smiled reassuringly. "You don't have to decide now. Think about it. This program has grown because of you. Sharing your story might inspire others to start something similar." George nodded, promising to consider it. As he left Margaret's office, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change again. 2 weeks later, Emma arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, her suitcase trailing behind her. She had taken a week off from work, telling herself she needed a break. In truth, she couldn't stop thinking about her father and the video she'd seen. She had no idea what to expect as she stepped into the terminal. Would her father recognize her? Would he even want to see her? The weight of her guilt pressed heavily on her chest as she wandered the bustling halls. Near the terminal's central hub, a small group of people had gathered. Curious, Emma edged closer and saw a familiar figure. It was George, seated on a bench, listening intently to a teary-eyed woman. He handed her a tissue, his face a mask of compassion, and spoke softly. Emma's heart ached at the sight of him. He looked older, thinner, but there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there the last time she saw him. As the woman left, wiping her tears, Emma hesitated. Every step closer felt heavier than the last. Finally, she stopped a few feet away and called out softly, "Dad!" George turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, they both stood frozen. Then, emotion overcame him. "Emma," he whispered, rising to his feet. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "It's me, Dad. I'm so sorry." George closed the gap between them, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Oh, Emma," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You're here. That's all that matters." They found a quiet corner of the airport to talk. George listened as Emma poured out her heart, admitting to her mistakes and the pain of living with the guilt of abandoning him. She spoke of her empty life in New York and the video that had brought her here. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, her voice breaking, "but I had to tell you how sorry I am." George reached for her hand, his own trembling. "Emma, life is a way of teaching us what's truly important. I forgive you because I love you. I always have, and I always will." Emma wept openly, the burden of years of regret lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope. Over the next few days, Emma spent her time shadowing George, watching as he worked his magic with passengers and staff alike. She was amazed by how much love and respect he had earned from everyone at the airport. "Dad, this is incredible," she said one evening as they shared dinner in the staff cafeteria. "You've built something truly special here." George smiled. "I'll just try to do what I can with the time I have. But having you here, Emma, this means more to me than anything else." Emma felt a deep sense of purpose stirring within her. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but for the first time, she wanted to be part of something bigger than herself. Little did she know, her father's work and the Hearts in Transit program would soon give her a chance to do just that. The morning air at Hartsfield-Jackson was thick with anticipation as George and Emma arrived at the terminal together. Emma's initial days at the airport had been an emotional whirlwind. While she had started to reconnect with her father, she also saw firsthand the transformative power of Hearts in Transit. The warmth, the smiles, and the gratitude from passengers and staff alike were unlike anything she had experienced in her corporate life. But deep inside, Emma wrestled with her own insecurities. Could she ever be part of something so meaningful? Could she make up for the years she had lost with her father? The day's calm was interrupted when George was approached by Margaret Lee. She looked unusually flustered. "George, there's been a situation at the terminal," she said. "A passenger has locked herself in a restroom, refusing to come out. Apparently, She's distraught about a family emergency. George nodded, his face resolute. Emma followed him, intrigued. They arrived at the restroom, where a young woman's muffled cries could be heard from inside. A small group of passengers and staff stood nearby. Unsure how to help, George crouched by the door and spoke gently. Hello? Name's Gerd. I'm here to help. Can we talk? There was a pause before the woman's trembling voice responded. Go away. You can't help me. Emma watched as her father's demeanor softened further. I don't know what you're going through, but you're not alone. Whatever it is, we can face it together. Minutes passed, and George continued speaking in calm, steady tones. Finally, the door creaked open. A tearful young woman, clutching a crumpled photo, emerged. George extended his hand, and she took it tentatively. As they sat on a nearby bench, the woman explained that her father had been rushed to the hospital while she was mid-flight. She had felt helpless, unsure how to face the situation. George listened intently before offering a heartfelt prayer, one that seemed to wrap the woman in a blanket of solace. By the end, her breathing had steadied, and her shoulders relaxed. Emma watched the scene with a mix of awe and guilt. Her father's ability to connect with others was extraordinary, but seeing the young woman's pain reminded her of the heartbreak she had caused her own father. That evening, Emma found herself sitting with George in his modest apartment near the airport. The room was cozy, filled with small mementos of his life before and during Hearts in Transit. One photo on the mantel caught Emma's eye, a picture of her as a child on George's shoulders, both of them laughing. Dad, she began hesitantly. How do you do it? How do you find the strength to forgive me after everything I've done? George set down his tea and looked at her warmly. Emma, I made my own mistakes in life. I learned that holding on to anger or regret only keeps you stuck in the past. When I lost everything, this airport gave me a second chance. How can I not offer the same to you? Tears welled in Emma's eyes. I don't deserve it. It's not about deserving, George said, his voice steady. It's about love. The next day, Margaret Lee called an impromptu meeting with George and Emma. George, the TV network feature on Hearts in Transit is moving forward, she announced. But there's more. They want to include Emma in the segment. Emma blinked in surprise. Me? Why? Margaret smiled. They've heard about your journey back to reconnect with your father. It's a compelling story, a family brought together through compassion and second chances. Emma hesitated. She wasn't used to being vulnerable, especially in front of a national audience. I don't know if I'm ready. George placed a hand on her shoulder. Emma, sharing our story could help others. Maybe it's time to take that step. The day of the interview arrived, and the airport buzzed with activity. Cameras were set up near one of the quieter lounges, and staff members gathered to watch from a distance. Emma stood nervously beside her father, fidgeting with her hands. You'll be great, George reassured her. The interviewer began with George, asking about his journey from being abandoned at the airport to becoming its honorary chaplain. George spoke with humility, emphasizing the importance of finding purpose in unexpected places. Then the focus shifted to Emma. Emma, what brought you back to reconnect with your father? The interviewer asked. Emma took a deep breath. I saw a video of my dad praying in the airport. It reminded me of everything I'd lost, the man who gave up so much for me, the love I took for granted. I knew I had to come back and make things right. The interviewer smiled. What have you learned since returning? Emma's voice softened. That love and compassion can heal even the deepest wounds. My father's work here has shown me what it means to truly care for others. I want to be part of that. The interview aired a week later, and the response was overwhelming. Messages of support and gratitude poured in from across the country. Passengers arriving at the airport sought out George to thank him or share their own stories of resilience. Emma began working more closely with the Hearts in Transit team, learning the intricacies of running the program. To her surprise, she found a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced in her corporate career. I think I want to stay, Emma told George one evening. I don't know exactly what role I'll play, but this feels right. George beamed. Emma, having you here is the greatest gift I could ask for." As Emma settled into her new life at the airport, she began to see herself not just as George's daughter, but as part of a larger mission. She worked alongside her father and the team to expand Hearts in Transit, bringing hope and comfort to countless travelers. For the first time in years, George and Emma felt like a family again, and they both knew this was only the beginning of their journey. Weeks had passed since the heartfelt interview aired, and life at Hartsfield-Jackson was busier than ever. Hearts in Transit saw an influx of volunteers inspired by George's story. Emma had officially joined the team, immersing herself in every detail of the program's operations. Her corporate skills, once used for profit-driven ventures, were now directed toward expanding the reach of her father's mission. One chilly morning, Emma was organizing a volunteer meeting when Margaret Lee called her into her office. Emma entered to find Margaret seated with a stack of documents and a thoughtful expression. "Emma," Margaret began, "you've done an exceptional job since joining the team. Your perspective and energy have brought something new to Hearts in Transit. But now, I have a proposition for you." Emma sat down, her curiosity piqued. "What kind of proposition?" Margaret leaned forward. "As you know, we've been discussing expanding the program to other airports. The board has approved the first phase, and we need someone to lead that effort." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "You mean me?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, I believe you're the right person for the job. You've proven your dedication, and you understand the heart of this program. But I want you to think carefully. This will be a significant responsibility." Emma returned to her desk, the weight of the offer sinking in. She glanced at her father, who was across the terminal, speaking with a young woman who had just missed her flight. The patience and warmth in his expression reminded Emma why Hearts in Transit mattered so much. That evening, Emma discussed the offer with George over dinner at his apartment. "Dad, Margaret wants me to lead the national expansion," Emma said, her tone hesitant. "But I don't know if I'm ready. What if I fail?" George smiled gently. "Emma, you've already come so far. Do you remember the girl who left me at this airport years ago? That wasn't you. The woman sitting in front of me now has found her purpose. You're ready." Tears filled Emma's eyes. "I don't want to leave you behind." "Dad, you won't be leaving me," George reassured her. "You'll be carrying forward what we've built together." A few days later, Emma accepted the offer. The announcement was met with excitement from the Hearts in Transit team. Margaret called a press conference to unveil the expansion plans, during which Emma outlined her vision for the program's future. "We want every airport to become a place where people feel seen, heard, and supported," Emma said. "This isn't just about travel. It's about connection and humanity." As the expansion plans began, Emma worked tirelessly to coordinate with airports across the country. She traveled frequently, meeting with airport executives, training new teams, and sharing her father's story. Each step brought her closer to the mission George had started. But the work wasn't without challenges. Not every airport welcomed the idea, and Emma faced resistance from some administrators who questioned the program's practicality. One particularly difficult meeting in New York left Emma feeling defeated. As she returned to her hotel room, she called George. "They don't believe in it." "Dad," Emma said, her voice breaking. "They think it's a waste of time." George's voice was calm and steady on the other end. "Emma, remember why we do this. It's not for recognition or approval. It's for the people who need us. Stay true to that, and you'll find a way." Back in Atlanta, George continued his work as the heart of the original Hearts in Transit program. Though his health was fragile, he insisted on being present for the passengers who needed him. One day, he noticed a boy sitting alone near the gate, clutching a teddy bear. George sat beside him. "Hey there, buddy. What's your name?" "Ethan." The boy replied quietly. "My mom's plane got delayed. She said I have to wait here." "George, know that. That could be hard, can it? Waiting can feel like forever." Ethan looked at George with wide eyes. "Are you here to help people?" George smiled. "That's right. And right now, I'm here to keep you company." As they talked, George shared stories of his own childhood, making Ethan laugh for the first time that day. By the time Ethan's mother arrived, the boy had forgotten all about the delay. Watching the reunion, George felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Even in small moments, his work made a difference. Months passed, and Emma's efforts began to bear fruit. The first few Hearts in Transit programs launched in major airports, each inspired by the original at Hartsfield-Jackson. The success stories started pouring in, passengers who found comfort, employees who felt supported, and communities that were transformed. Emma often returned to Atlanta to update her father. During one visit, she brought a surprise. "Dad, I want you to see something," Emma said, handing George her laptop. On the screen was a video compilation of testimonials from people across the country who had been impacted by Hearts in Transit. A single mother spoke about how the team helped her during a panic attack. An elderly man shared how the program reunited him with a long-lost friend. A young boy beamed as he described the new children's play area inspired by Tommy's idea. George watched in awe, his eyes brimming with tears. "Emma, this is incredible. You've taken this further than I ever dreamed." Emma squeezed his hand. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Dad." 1 year later, George, Emma, and Tommy stood together at a ceremony honoring Hearts in Transit's impact. Margaret Lee, now retired, gave a speech celebrating the program's achievements. George Ross started this journey with a simple act of kindness. Margaret said, and thanks to his vision, it has become a national movement. As George stepped forward to accept an award, the audience erupted into applause. Looking out at the crowd, he felt overwhelmed by gratitude. "This isn't about me," George said, his voice steady. "It's about what we can achieve when we choose compassion over indifference. My daughter Emma has taken this mission to new heights, and I couldn't be prouder." Emma joined her father on stage, tears streaming down her face. "Everything I've done has been inspired by you. Dad, thank you for never giving up on me." Tommy, now a confident teenager, added, "And thank you, Grandpa, for showing us what it means to care." As the sun set over Hartsfield-Jackson, the Ross family stood together, watching the planes take off. Their journey had been filled with pain, growth, but they had emerged stronger and more united. For George, Emma, and Tommy, Hearts in Transit was more than a program. It was a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the courage to start anew. Together, they looked toward the future, ready to embrace whatever came next. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey of love, resilience, and second chances. George's story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, hope and kindness can light the way. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales that inspire and uplift. Your support helps us continue to bring these life-changing stories to light. Remember, every act of compassion makes a difference. Until next time, take care and stay inspired.